My name's Chloe Findle, and I'm going to be discussing the Sons of Liberty's development of justified destruction and death. The Boston Tea Party was a pivotal protest in 1773 that utilized disguise and destruction to fight laws found unconstitutional. The war was between the American colonists and the British East India Company, who went back and forth with implementing and breaking laws due to the British need of financial gain after the French and Indian War of 1754, and the colonists' views that they were being treated unfairly by legislation, such as the Stamp Act of 1756 or the Tea Act of 1773. This is a photo of the official documentation of colonists meeting to discuss their upset with British laws. The colonists met to discuss exactly what they were upset about and ways they could resolve the issue. The Stamp Act of 1765 was Britain's first attempt to raise revenue through direct taxation on American colonists. The act forced colonists to solely use British paper products for materials such as newspapers, legal documents, or pamphlets. The Stamp Act sparked the colonists' upset because it limited the power of the American government. The Tea Act of 1773 was enacted for Britain's benefit to allow the British East India Company to directly sell tea to the colonists. This created an increase in American taxes and a decrease in colonists' natural rights. Colonists were not able to import their own tea, brew their own tea, nor get taxed by their own government. This was the final straw for the American colonists, which gathered great attention from the Sons of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty were a secret organization of well-known American patriots, for example Samuel Adams and John Hancock, who planned to revolt against the British government for their mistreatment towards the colonists. They planned to disguise themselves as Mohawk Indians in order to sneak onto British ships to destroy and disperse imported chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. The American patriots' role in the Boston Tea Party intensely directed the creation and societal perspectives of protest because destruction was defined as an acceptable tactic for change, dishonesty was supported, and violence was deemed as an adequate response. Because the Sons of Liberty proved to be the best organized, most capably led, and most efficient bands of extremists, it wouldn't be delusional to believe they could have developed an equally effective form of positive protest that would have secured safety and lives. It's important to understand the advocacies that facilitate social change, because when strategies work, they are repeated, but when violence is reoccurring, societal safety is decreasing. The Sons of Liberty act of defiance in the Boston Tea Party led to the American Revolution and the development of the new nation. To first analyze, destruction became defined as an acceptable tactic for success in protest because individuals perceived the annihilation of 342 chests of tea, which today equates to $1.7 million worth of damage, as being justified in producing change. An example of this was developed from the British Parliament's response to the Boston Tea Party. Infuriated by the financial damage the British were enduring, the government established the Intolerable/Coercive Acts of 1774 to reassert their territorial dominance. The British closed the port of Boston with the Boston Port Act, restricted political public gatherings with the Massachusetts Government Act, forced colonists to house and supply soldiers with the Quartering Act, extended the religious boundaries into Catholicism with the Quebec Act, and eliminated the colonists' rights to trial royal British officials in Massachusetts with the Administration of Justice Act. The Intolerable Acts caused American colonists to immediately feel that their religious values and comforts were being destroyed. Because the colonists did not feel their natural rights were being respected, they again rebelled, which was cause of the American Revolution. This resulted in American colonies no longer being part of the British territory, establishing the United States as an independent nation. This is an illustration of the Boston Port. Another example that supports the destruction of systems for another group's personal gain is the Indian Removal Act of 1830. The act was developed by the American government because with the United States becoming an independent nation, their need and desire for evolution increased. With the cotton gin producing rapid agricultural advancements, white settlers felt they were entitled towards the Native Americans' territory because regions, especially in the Southeast, fostered land that could help increase the production of cotton. Cotton was valued in America due to its ability to produce clothes and economic gain. The law was developed to give Andrew Jackson authority to negotiate land in the Southeast to expand American culture, economic growth, and ways of life. However, the law lacked compassion for the Cherokees' loss of tradition, structures of land, and religious structure. The Cherokees did not want to move from North Carolina and Georgia, for that was their homeland and where all their values and religious customs were practiced. But when Andrew Jackson passed the Indian Removal Act of 1830, the Cherokees had no choice but to brave the Trail of Tears due to the destruction of their culture and homes. The Trail of Tears was a dangerous path that crossed the Mississippi into the new established Indian Territory. Thousands of Native Americans who tried the journey died or were severely injured. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 immediately destroyed the Cherokees' territory and safety, and soon after directly affected their location and the cultural loss we see today. Next, the use of disguise present in America Patriots Act of dressing as the Mohawk Indians establishes the shared idea that dishonesty is supported when seeking transformation in rules or new ways of life. For example, the American presidential election of 1800 is an example of how dishonesty is used to sway decisions. It was the fourth ever presidential election, and its candidates were frenemies John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Both candidates had lies spread about them, shaping the perspectives of their voters. John Adams was the second president fighting for security in his second term, while Thomas Jefferson was vice president seeking a positional change to president. Thomas Jefferson was called to have a horrible intersect character and defined to function as a bad Christian, while John Adams was defined as a mean-spirited son of a half-breed who aimed to overthrow the federal government and overpower it. The lies told about the candidates could have immediately shifted their voters' choice. If individuals did perceive John Adams as a monster, they may not have voted for his competitor, which directly affects the United States presidential history and possibly even values today. Another example of dishonesty fueling political decision can be seen in William Henry Harrison's success in the 1840 presidential election. William Henry Harrison was a normal man who had no strong political thoughts nor unique background. He won his short-lived spot in the presidency due to the lies construed from slogans and his supporters. Harrison was rumored to be a war hero who had lived in a log cabin and was obsessed with hard liquor. The title war hero could have been contradicted by the large amount of death that took place during the Battle of Tippecanoe. But the spread of misinformation and Harrison's already well-liked character minimized society's want to see him as anything less than a hero. The idea that Harrison was born in a log cabin and obsessed with hard liquor made the voters view him as humble and human, which resulted in Harrison winning the electoral vote by a landslide. It did not matter that Harrison was born in a Virginia plantation, because dishonesty was supported by Harrison and other members of his political party because it positively impacted the Whig Party. The dishonesty immediately helped Harrison's position in the election and forever helped shape who our ninth president was and who was destined to be after his death. If William Henry Harrison was not our ninth president, it's unable to know if John Tyler would have been our 10th. Lastly, because the American patriots sought revision through violence such as vandalism, riots, and harassment towards governmental officials, the idea that violence was an adequate response for wanted change was established. The Sand Creek Massacre of 1864, also known as the Chivington Massacre, was the unfair battle of Americans against the Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians. Motive for the war was based on Americans' want for ownership of Indian territory in Colorado. The original treaty of 1851 assured the ability for Indians and Americans to share the land, but Americans' want for power, cultural expansion, and more entitlements grew their greed that developed the Americans' want to change law and start war. The battle was unfair first because the cause of the Indians' upset was the fact their rights were being removed without the rightful process. Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians were not able to look over the treaty, the council did not officially write the treaty, and information was misunderstood by representatives such as Little Raven and Black Kettle. With the unright process, the trial was nothing more of a mockery, yet the worst was yet to come. With the Americas' lust for territory growing, Americans set war on Indian troops, targeting men, women, and children. Indians did not want to meet their differences with a battle, for they were at war with the whites. Approximately 150 Indians were killed, two-thirds being women and children who were unable to defend themselves. Because Americans wanted a change in properties, they achieved their goal with inhuman violence. Americans' avoidable tragedy that immediately decreased Indian culture and safety ultimately affected the Indians' trust with American government. Next, the New York draft riots of 1863 also used violence to gain a wanted change. The drafts began in response to the Civil War. Both the North and South were running out of money and volunteering soldiers. With the battle brought to a stalemate, the United States and rebel Confederacy established military drafts. However, selecting soldiers was neither fair nor respected by all participants. The wealthy were able to pay a fee or a member of the lower class to serve their freedom from military obligation, where the immigrants who migrated in need of available work to support themselves and their family had no choice but to join the military due to the conscription policies. With the war becoming a battle targeting racial inequalities, immigrants sought change through riots. Irish immigrants assaulted civilians, raided government officials, burned properties, and destroyed buildings. Property damage came to an estimated total of $1,500,000, and about 119 people died. Because immigrants wanted equality and change, they relied on the common pattern of taking part in violent protests in hopes of revision. The inequalities present in the New York drafts ultimately stimulated the decrease in African American residency. This is legislation from the draft riots of 1863. Finally, the Gordon Riots of 1780 were the most serious, violent, and widespread disturbances to occur in the 18th century Britain. They were motivated by anti-Catholicism sentiment. Lord George Gordon worked to repeal Catholic rights in 1780 because Christian views were deemed more valuable. The want for the dominance of Christianity fostered the British Catholics' upset. Protests of violence, destruction, and war broke out, harming and killing an estimated of 700 people. Several days of a constant bloody battle were thought to ultimately have positive repercussions if the ideal religion became the state's official religion. The loss of family structures, culture, and unity ceased to matter. The Gordon Riots negatively impacted Britain's reputation in Europe for many years after the tragic event. This is an illustration of the Gordon Riots. If a repeated response is never corrected or questioned, the response can never be bettered or changed. Violent protests repeat because they are perceived as a justification reaction towards unjust treatment or loss. If conversation was more valued, the present rates of death may decrease, and diversity could flourish. In conclusion, the impact of American patriots' role in the Boston Tea Party negatively altered societal patterns of protest through the justification of destruction, supported dishonesty, and accepted violence. These are my scholarly references, and these are my primary references.